Most of us grew up with the magic of Disney, from The Lion King, Peter Pan, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and even some newer classics like Toy Story or The Incredibles.
Where is my super suit?
All of these movies taught us valuable life lessons. In The Lion King, we learned to embrace responsibility. We learned in Peter Pan to always maintain our childlike spirit. And of course, in Toy Story, we learned the power of friendship. But the golden age of Disney is long gone. Nowadays, the only thing Disney does well is destroy every brand under their name and get into useless political fights that won't go anywhere. In fact, not only are they experiencing flop after flop at the box office, they're also showing kids things that many parents just don't want their kids to be thinking about. This might come as a surprise to those that haven't been following the Disney drama, but the truth is, not only is Disney collapsing, but things are actually much worse than they might seem on the surface. Not only is your beloved Disney collapsing, but it's actually turning into a villain, a complete turn of events from what just a few decades ago would have seemed impossible. So I'm going to show you exactly how we got here and why things are even worse than they seem. From going completely woke, butchering your favorite movie classics, to political scandals, and charging such insane prices at your beloved theme parks average families can no longer visit, this is why Disney is completely falling apart. Before the 1990s, Disney was struggling, and they were by no stretch of the imagination the Disney that we know today. In fact, after the Disney brothers died, it was mostly just decades of putting out flop after flop. The company was going nowhere, but that was all about to change. In fact, not only was Disney about to turn things around, but they were about to enter what would become known as the Disney Renaissance, a 10-year period where Disney would produce hit after hit, and it all began in 1989 with The Little Mermaid. Over the next 10 years, Disney would follow up with all of your favorite classics: Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, and Mulan. These movies not only printed tons of money for Disney, but they all entered the zeitgeist and played a pivotal role in every kid's childhood that was born around this time. But just when Disney thought that they were invincible, the 10-year renaissance would all come to an end in 1999 with the release of Tarzan.
Why am I so different?
But to put all of this into perspective, this isn't just some 10-year period where they had a few hits. This is widely considered to be one of the most successful 10-year movie production periods of all time. Just take a look at these numbers. The Lion King, adjusted for inflation, brought in $835 million and is still the highest grossing non-computer animated film of all time. Not adjusted for inflation, Aladdin brought in over $500 million. Beauty and the Beast, over $400 million. The Little Mermaid, over $200, and their budget was only $40 million. So in today's terms, we are talking billions upon billions of dollars that these movies generated. But at this point, just when Disney thought that they couldn't produce a flop and everything they touched turned to gold, things started to turn. In the early 2000s, there were tons of animated hits, many of which might even be some of your favorites. We're talking Toy Story 1 and 2, Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, and even Monsters, Inc. But the thing is, you might be shocked to find out that Disney didn't actually produce any of these hits at all. In fact, Disney didn't really even produce anything special in the early 2000s, and it was quickly becoming a massive problem for them. That's right, all of the movies that you love from this era were produced by Pixar, not Disney. In fact, Disney was getting so destroyed in the animated space that something big needed to happen. And that's how one Hail Mary phone call to Steve Jobs in 2006 changed the direction of Disney forever. Knowing that they were falling behind, in 2005, Disney hired Bob Iger to turn things around. In an interview at the time, Bob admitted that Disney animation, quote, needed a huge improvement. But rather than improve from within, he wanted to go to the best in the industry, and that was Pixar. And so what do you do when you are the CEO of Disney and you want to buy Pixar? Well, you pick up the phone and you call the CEO of Pixar. But unfortunately for Bob Iger, the CEO at the time was, of course, Steve Jobs. As the story goes, Bob Iger wanted to discuss in person with Steve Jobs the potential of Disney buying Pixar. So Bob picked up the phone, called Steve, and said he had a wild idea. Can we meet in person to discuss? Steve Jobs, being Steve Jobs, couldn't resist the possibility of a wild idea. So he asked Bob right then and there, well, what's the idea? So of course, Bob said, were thinking about potentially buying Pixar. And Steve Jobs, being Steve Jobs, says, well, that's not that wild of an idea. So a few weeks later, Iger found himself at Apple's headquarters to meet with Jobs. When he got there, Jobs pulled out a whiteboard and began writing down all of the pros and cons. Iger would later say in an interview that Steve Jobs wrote down 3 things under the cons list. Number 1, Disney's culture will destroy Pixar. Secondly, distraction will kill Pixar's creativity. And third, your board will never let you do it. But at the end of the session, Jobs told Iger that a few solid pros are more powerful than dozens of cons. And Disney would go on to acquire Pixar for $7.4 billion, closing the deal in 2006. So while Iger hoped that this would be the purchase for Disney that would allow them to ride off into the sunset, it turns out that Steve Jobs might have actually been onto something. But over the next 15 years, Disney's culture would go on to destroy Pixar. And it wasn't just Pixar. Disney's culture would go on to destroy almost everything that it touched, including brands that many of you thought were untouchable. Before Disney's complete collapse, they had one last hurrah, which, depending on your age, you might actually view as Disney's golden era. This is when we saw the launch of Disney Channel, with Even Stevens and Lizzie McGuire, 2 massive hits that ran in the early 2000s. The success of these 2 shows led to The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, That's So Raven, Hannah Montana, and Wizards of Waverly Place, all shows that quickly became part of the culture. The success of these shows led to Disney turning them all into a movie, and that made the company millions. But of course, we can't forget their most successful Disney Channel movie, High School Musical, and more specifically, High School Musical 2. The movie came out on August 17, 2007 to 17.2 million viewers and set a long-standing record for the highest rated television premiere in the history of the channel. But behind the scenes of the Disney Channel, the company as a whole was not doing well. Being completely incapable of creating literally anything new or innovative like Mark Zuckerberg, they began buying up any company that was doing remotely well in the late 90s. And we're not talking about just a small shopping spree here. Just take a look at all of the companies that Disney owns. It's almost impossible even to keep track of all of them. The most notable ones include ABC and ESPN. They acquired them in 1996. Pixar, as we saw in 2006, the A&E Network in 2012, and a massive purchase of 20th Century Studios in 2019 for $71.3 billion. And yes, this does mean that Homer could technically become an Avenger. And of course, we also can't forget Marvel, which they acquired in 2009 for only $4 billion, which has to be hands down one of the largest acquisition steals in history. So while yes, Disney has had an incredible run with the Marvel franchise, they're even managing to completely burn that brand too. I myself am not a big Marvel fan. From an outsider's perspective, it seems absolutely impossible to keep up with what's going on with the franchise. They are just putting out new stuff seemingly every week and every month. And honestly, I just have better things to do with my time than watch movies that are just 100% CGI generated. But it's not just Marvel that they've managed to slowly destroy and produce flop after flop. Recent movies like Doctor Strange, Thor 3, Ant-Man 3, Lightyear, and Indiana Jones were all complete duds at the box office. Strange World was the last animated film that Disney made, and nobody even remembers it. Heck, I didn't even hear about it until I did research for this video. But it's not just Disney's focus on putting out quantity over quality and just putting out mediocre content day in and day out that is leading to their collapse. Have you heard about their political battles or even the recent prices at Disney World that make it completely impossible for the average family to visit? And if that doesn't upset you, then listening to some 22-year-old tell you how dated and racist your favorite classic is just might be the icing on the cake.
Disney has an estimated 223,000 employees, and the plan, say executives, is to cut just over 3% of the workforce.
Over the last few years, Disney has been losing hundreds of millions of dollars every quarter, and it's led to them now laying off thousands of employees. It is an absolute disaster. But it's impossible to look at the collapse of Disney without looking at their political agenda and their political battles, because at the end of the day, when you think about it, it might actually be at the root of their problems. For starters, Disney is currently in the process of suing the state of Florida and its governor, Ron DeSantis. It all started in 2022 when DeSantis passed the Florida Parental Rights in Education Act, or as most incorrectly called it, the Don't Say Gay bill. The law prohibits public schools from teaching kids in kindergarten through grade 3 about sexual orientation or gender identity. Of course, because this law pertains to just kids, very young kids, this law makes complete sense for anybody with any common sense. But apparently, there's not a lot of that at Disney because it didn't take long for them to vocalize their disapproval of the law. And that is when things started to heat up. For decades, Disney has enjoyed special tax advantages thanks to what's called the Reedy Creek Improvement Act, but that may no longer be the case. In fact, DeSantis was so mad with Disney's comments that they appealed the act, meaning that Disney could no longer enjoy the tax advantages that they have been milking for decades. This is going to increase overall costs for Disney, but the thing is though, these costs are just going to be passed on to consumers. They're just going to be passed on to attendants to their parks. At the end of the day, it's going to be the average family, the average Joe that is going to pay the price for this. So while we'll need to wait and see what happens with this ongoing lawsuit, this brings up an important point about your beloved Disney theme parks. While Disney Parks is still one of the very few things that are still working for Disney, bringing in $29 billion last year, it looks like that might not last much longer. While attendance at their Florida theme park was up 35% in 2022, it's still way down from pre-pandemic levels. But that is not the problem. The problem is how unaffordable their theme parks have become for the average family.
And there's a child ticket offer starting at $50.
2 tickets for 1 day were $285. Parking is not included, it was $30.
$15.62. 9 out of 10. Next, some chili whip with mango. More like mango bankrupt because this costs $10.
I mean, the perfect example of what's going on with this company is their highly anticipated Star Wars themed hotel. It is a joke. Disney spent a decade putting this thing together and spent over $400 million on it. And yet, just over a year after opening, they just announced that they're shutting it down. And this is no surprise. If you look at the prices of this thing, it's absolutely disgusting. For the all-inclusive 2-night experience, it was an insane $4,800 for couples and $6,000 for a family of 4. When the average salary is under $60,000 in the US, only fools would spend 10% of their annual wage on just a 2-night experience. This is just how out of touch Disney is with reality. At the end of the day, this is really just bad news for kids because they're not going to get to experience the magic of Disney. They won't get to experience the magic of Snow White. But actually, come to think of it, Snow White is causing a whole lot of drama and problems for Disney. And Snow White is the perfect example of how Disney is taking what many thought were untouchable characters, these characters that were so timeless and classic, and they're just absolutely destroying them. How could this be? After all, Snow White was Disney's first ever movie, and getting to play Snow White for any actress would be the role of a lifetime. Well, that's not the case for Rachel Zegler.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in. I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. Like, I'm being so serious. I watched it once and then I went on the ride in Disney World, which was called Snow White's Scary Adventures. Doesn't sound like something a little kid would like. Was terrified of it. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Yeah. Weird. Super weird. So we didn't do that this time.
Hopefully we can all agree that when this movie comes out, we will all just stay home and watch the original. But the good news is that might not be for a while. In fact, maybe, just maybe, Disney is slowly starting to get the message as they recently announced they're now delaying the release of the movie by an entire year, and it'll now only come out in 2025. Why the delay? The company has said that actor strikes played a role, but the real reason is because they needed to make changes. For a company that has so clearly gone woke, Snow White was an incredible opportunity to offer roles to 7 actors in Hollywood that have dwarfism. Did Disney do that? Of course not. Instead, they hired 7 politically correct companions, and the backlash was huge. So when the delay was announced, they announced it along with a new picture. And in that picture, there was a noticeable change. Did they do the right thing? Did they make the obvious change that anybody would say needed to be done? Of course not. The movie is supposed to be a live action remake, but the 7 dwarfs are now all animated. You literally can't make this stuff up. Overall, the remake of Snow White is a cluster of absolutely terrible woke decisions and is the perfect analogy for Disney as a whole and what they've become. Rather than being told what to like or being given a political message when going to the theater, the average family just wants to bring their family to the movies and be entertained. That's it. As viewers and lifetime fans of so many of these franchises, we deserve better. The good news is Disney is completely collapsing, and maybe, just maybe, they'll get the message before it's too late. Thanks for watching.